Good afternoon. Welcome to this live broadcast of our meeting. My name is Peter Ginder, and I'm the chair of the Charter Commission. I will now call this meeting to order and ask the clerk to call the roll so that we may verify the presence of a quorum.
Commissioner Boone?
Present.
Clegg?
Here.
Davis Carter is absent. DeMillo?
Present.
Doherty?
Here.
Garcia?
Present.
Hawkins is absent. Hill?
Present.
Kozak?
Here.
Nye?
Present.
Perry?
Here.
Sandberg?
Present.
Smith?
Here.
Vice Chair Rubenstein?
Here.
And Chair Ginder.
Present.
We have 13 present.
Let the record reflect we have a quorum, and we will now proceed to our agenda. The first item on our agenda is the adoption of the agenda. May I please have a motion to adopt the agenda?
So moved.
Second.
We have a proper motion before us. Is there any further discussion? Seeing no further discussion, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. All those opposed say nay. That motion passes and the agenda is adopted. Next item is the acceptance of minutes, and may I please have a motion to accept the minutes of our previous meeting on December 15th? Move, Perry. Is there a second?
Second, Clegg.
We have a proper motion before us, and is there any further discussion? Seeing no further discussion, all those in favor say aye. Aye. All those opposed say nay. That motion passes and the minutes are accepted. Next item on the agenda is the chair's report. Welcome to all the commissioners, newly appointed and reappointed, and just still commissioners, to our first meeting. I would like to note that we have a new commissioner joining us today, Commissioner Joshua Nye. And so, Commissioner Nye, if you would introduce yourself and maybe just give us a little bit about yourself.
Sure. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair and members, my name is Josh Nye. I am a resident of Ward 4. I live in the Shingle Creek neighborhood of North Minneapolis with my two cats, Bart and Clark. I've been a resident of North Minneapolis a little over 6 years, a resident of Minneapolis for about 10 years. Career-wise, I spent a number of, or most of my career working for elected officials at both the state and the federal level. I love reading complicated, complex legislation and legislative materials, and I value language, the language that we use in writing legislation, and so wanted to serve with you all on this commission to ensure that the language that we use when we present items to voters is clear, concise, and is understandable by everyone who has the opportunity to vote in Minneapolis. And so was a little surprised when I got when I got the appointment, but I'm very, very glad to be here, and I look forward to learning from you all. I look forward to hearing from anyone in Minneapolis who has any thoughts they want to share, and just look forward to a productive time on this commission. Thank you.
Thank you and welcome. I'd also like to just take a moment. Commissioner Metke isn't here, was not reappointed this year, but I would like to take a moment to thank her for her years of service on this commission, as well as her years of service to Minneapolis in a number of capacities. So I would like to extend my personal thanks, and I know other commissioners would like to do the same to Commissioner Metke. I know on the chair's report, the one thing I wanted to add is having an orientation by the city clerk, Casey Carl, on some of the obligations we have as members of the Charter Commission.
Good evening, Mr. Chair, members of the Commission, and Commissioner Nye has joined the right group for reading long, complex legal documents. The packet that the clerks provided to you that starts off with the Chapter 410 from the Minnesota statutes is a compilation of documents that my office put together to share with you as part of an orientation, and I use that word very loosely, a discussion about the responsibility and roles of charter commissions generally and the Minneapolis Charter Commission in particular. Minnesota was the 4th state in the United States to grant, through a constitutional amendment approved by voters in the late 1800s, what we call home rule authority. So prior to that, of course, under the 10th Amendment to the United States Constitution, local governments are creatures of states. They are not recognized in the federal system of government, which divides, of course, between our united or federal government and the 50 states. Cities, counties, townships, school boards, and other local units of government are creations of the state and are administered and run, organized, and managed by the state. Legislature has total control over the creation of local units of government. But with that amendment in the late 1800s, the concept of home rule authority was to give those local units of government a little more control. So it didn't require cities, for example, to run over to the state legislature and say, "Mother, may I do this?" or "Mother, may I have this appointed position? May we impose this tax? Could we develop this roadway? Would you mind if we named the road this?" Without that sort of delegation of authority, cities existed at the pleasure of the legislature and are actually, I think, organizationally structured within the executive branch, created by the legislature, put into the executive branch, and operate there. With the creation of home rule authority codified in Chapter 410, a city, through its electorate, can choose to say, we want a little bit more control. What you'll hear us sometimes say, home rule control, home rule powers, home rule authority. That is the voters claiming for themselves the ability to have a bit more self-governance and independence than what would otherwise then be dictated by state statutes. So in Minnesota, with the passage of home rule authority, you have 2 classes of city. You can either be a statutory city or a charter city. Minneapolis is a charter city and is governed then under the general provisions of Chapter 410. Statutory cities are governed generally under the provisions of Chapter 412 and then other statutes that apply to them. And there are other statutes beyond 410 that apply to us, but it is through the constitutional amendment and the combination of 410 that gives us a charter commission and a home rule charter that then serves as a sort of, I don't want to say it is the Constitution, but it is like the Constitution of the city government. There were discussions at the time of how to appoint charter commissions. As you might imagine, there was a process put forward to say, well, the local governing body should appoint the charter commission. Local governing body should be the charter commission. We should elect a charter commission. Ultimately, the state legislature at the time decided that the judicial branch had a lot more validity, I guess, with the electorate at large in terms of staying out of politics, and therefore was vested those appointments into the judicial districts. And the chief judge of the judicial district of the court makes the appointments, as you know. So the chief judge appoints all of you. Minneapolis has a 15-member charter commission. The statutes provide for variable memberships, and I believe we are the largest. 15 is the largest you can get. Some cities have charters that are smaller in size. We have a 15-member charter, have always had a 15-member charter, appointed by the judge. Members are appointed to 4-year terms that have no limits on them. The requirements are that you must be a resident of the city and you must be an eligible qualified voter. So those are the 2 pieces that you must meet in terms of the statutory requirements to be considered for appointment as a member of our charter commission. What you have in front of you, 410, lays out the duties of the Charter Commission. The original Charter Commission sets forward the first charter, and I'm sure all of you have enough history of the city, I won't bore you with that, to know that several efforts were made to establish a charter after home rule was passed by constitutional amendment and failed. Other cities took advantage of that home rule authority faster than did the largest city, Minneapolis. Ultimately, in 1920, the same year that the right to vote was extended to women, the people of Minneapolis voted for a home rule charter. That was our first home rule charter in 1920, and at that time, the legislature, a little bit tired of taking care of local business, simply took all of the laws that applied to cities generally, all of the laws applicable to cities of the first class, which is a description for population. So first class means most populous. and any special laws that they had adopted up until that point that applied only to the city of Minneapolis. So that three types of general laws for all cities, first-class cities, and special laws applicable to the city of Minneapolis, they cobbled them together and said, here is your charter, do this. And the voters said, okay. That is the most unorthodox way that you can probably get a charter. The national, I'm not sure I'm going to get the League of Cities at the national level has a model charter. Typically, you start with a model charter. There's a description of how government should be structured, and that process is a little bit more structured. That's not how it happened in Minneapolis. And so, as this body knows through its actions, our charter was very complex, very long, very detailed, and this body, as the holder of the charter, went through a multi-year process of enacting a plain language revision that was adopted by voters in 2013 and became effective in 2015. That then is now the charter that we're working with that you all have inherited. And I say inherited because it is the role of the Charter Commission, much like a standing constitutional convention, to hold in trust the charter on behalf of the people of Minneapolis. So the original way of amending the city charter, which is provided under 410.12, where we talk about amendments, page 5, it's listed under the statutes. The original way of amending the charter was it always had to go to the electorate. That made it really hard to make technical, very detailed changes. And so later the legislature made a second way of amending charters, and we call this internally the administrative process. We try and limit that to technical amendments that are very detailed and sort of inside baseball. And that is that it requires three groups to agree. First and foremost, this body, who holds the charter in trust, has to say, yep, those amendments that have been proposed can and should be done by ordinance and not referred to the electorate. They're highly complex. Probably most voters and lay people won't understand how detailed that is. So we concur as the Charter Commission that this can be done by ordinance. And then the City Council works with their attorneys to draft an ordinance that would amend the charter. All 13 members of the council must vote in the affirmative to pass that ordinance, and then the mayor must sign off and say yes. So if any of those three players, the Charter Commission, the council, the mayor, don't agree, it doesn't go by ordinance and can only be then referred to voters as a ballot question. So those are the two primary pathways. I'm going to talk about that a little bit later, but we provided for you here the statutes that talk about charter cities, and in particular the Charter Commission and its work in managing, holding in trust the city charter, which is what we like to refer to as our constitution of the city government. I'll pause in case there are questions about the comments I've made thus far or about the chapter 410 that I've provided you. And I would also acknowledge that several of the members here, both as attorneys and long-term members, particularly Commissioner Clegg and Chair Ginder, certainly can answer questions, and Commissioner Kozak as well. So, if not, I'm going to hurriedly pass on to the next document we provided you. You'll flip over several pages and you'll find this document, which is labeled Guide to Amending the City Charter. I put this guide together a few years ago with the City Attorney's Office. When I first joined the city in 2010, we didn't really do charter amendments too often, and most of them were done by an ordinance, so it was done internally. Not as many questions referred to voters. Since that time, both in terms of amendments by ordinance and amendments referred to voters, and just even initiating the process has picked up. We've done several in my 14 years here, and this guide was an effort to provide a consistent process that all three of the major players, the Charter Commission, the City Council, and the Mayor, as well as internal staff and the public could look at and say, oh, that's the process we're on. So I will just draw your attention to the first full page of that. It looks like this, and there's a flow chart here on this page, and you can see that it says the default path number 1 by ballot or path number 2 by ordinance. And I'll briefly discuss this. I'll tell you that in the rest of the guide, this lays out in excruciating detail for you the process of how these different pieces work. But in terms of the default by ballot question, either the City Council or the Charter Commission or what we call a citizen's petition, meaning at least 5 voters within the city of Minneapolis carry a petition to amend the charter. So any of those groups can initiate a ballot question. The process ultimately has to come through this body, because this body, if it's a citizen petition, has to approve the language if there's more than 1,000 words to be amended. And so the question that's submitted to the voters and that goes on the ballot has to be set by this body in terms of the petition process. Then the Charter Commission plays that oversight role, but cannot change the substance, right? So if the citizens petition process is how we initiate a question, this body plays a ministerial role in shepherding that process forward, but cannot change the underlying process. This body, of course, can always recommend a proposal to amend the city charter and submit it to voters. And then the city council likewise can initiate a proposal to refer to voters, but also has to come to this body and work with them. Again, this body touches and manages all the processes. The second alternative pathway I mentioned by ordinance can be initiated either by the Charter Commission or the City Council. Here again, we're amending the charter with a proposal by ordinance, and I will note what's not shown on here to reflect its status as a constitution. Directly, the citizens can either initiate a petition and or vote on a ballot question on the left side where it says by ballot. On the right, this process, which was made to be a little bit faster and expedite highly technical processes, there is still voter touch. If the Charter Commission and the Council agree to amend the charter by ordinance, a petition can be submitted by voters to say, we don't like what you just did by ordinance, and we demand that you submit that to us as a question on the ballot. So even if we go down that path over here in the lighter blue by ordinance, voters can still say, no, we don't agree. We think that should be referred to the electorate to be decided as a ballot question through a petition process. So in both cases, the people ultimately have a touch on their constitution. That gets you through the amendment process. It's a fairly long document, as I said. It does provide step-by-step instructions for each of those different pathways. This body at the December meeting adopted the timeline for this year's charter amendments to be submitted by citizen petition. I'm sorry I didn't get these packets page numbered, but several pages after what we just discussed, there's a page that is titled 2024 Charter Amendment Submission Timeline. And I know the clerks will put this on the web in the LIMS file so the public can access it as well. But for the purposes of this meeting, we'll go forward with the 2024 Charter Amendment Submission Timeline. Every year, those of you who have been here for a while know that my office will bring this timeline to you, and we adopt this timeline and we post it on the website so that the members of the public know. If you're interested in bringing forward a proposal, this is the deadline. And the most important deadline is essentially that a proposal from a citizen's petition needs to be submitted and before this body by May 1st of each year. And that gets us to meet the statutory timeline, which dictates when ballot questions have to be submitted to both the county auditor and the Secretary of State in order to be included on that year's ballot. So we start with that, the date of the actual general election in November, and we back it up from there as the statutes dictate. We bring it to you every year, and we update this. It's usually right at the beginning of July is the deadline, and so we like to have about 2 months internally, because once the petition is brought forward, there has to be a process to validate the petition, count the signatures, validate that a certain percentage are in fact signatures by valid voters in the city of Minneapolis, and then the council has to work on the language of the ballot question, and all of that has to be done between May 1st and that July 9 deadline. So that's pretty tight. And that's why we give as much time as we can to citizens for a petition process, but that was adopted by us for this year's petition process. If you flip the page, the last thing we included in here are the rules of the Charter Commission. These rules have been in place for many, many years. They've been amended occasionally from time to time, but these are the rules that govern the operation of the Charter Commission and its meetings and how it operates. And you'll notice there are references in terms of letter D talks about committees and work groups. We created a permanent standing committee in the amendment review group in the last term, and then also letter E, proposed amendments, talk at a high level about this body's expectations for how charter amendments will be handled. So put that in front of you. Happy to respond to any questions about any of the other materials or to refer it back to you, Mr. Chair, or your members for questions that might come.
Are there any questions for Mr. Carl? And I would note, I think the rules are actually attached to another, to the annual report. So if you're looking for the rules in this particular packet, they're in the packet. with the annual report. They're in both? Okay. Any other questions for Mr. Carl? Commissioner, go ahead.
Thank you, Chair Ginder. I just want to thank you, Commissioner Carl, for this eloquent presentation and reminder. Great way to start the new year.
Thank you.
Seeing nothing else from Mr. Carl at this moment, our next agenda item is the election of the 2024 Charter Commission officers. In terms of procedure, I intend at this time to turn the running of the meeting over to the clerk for the election of the president, vice president, and secretary.
Thank you, Chair Ginder. In terms of the procedure for the elections for those positions, we'll be following the same procedure. And it'll be as follows. First, I'll open up the floor for nominations. After the nomination has been made, that period for nominating will be closed. Afterwards, we will proceed to take a vote by roll call. There will be a separate vote for each nominee. Third, the nominee will receive, who received the majority vote will be declared the winner of that election. Are there any questions about that process that I just outlined? Oh, Kozak?
Mr. Chairman, I want to nominate someone for chair. And I want to nominate Peter Ginder. And I just want to say that when he took over a year ago, he had big shoes to fill, and he's done an exceptional job of doing so. And so I will nominate Peter Ginder for chairman.
Thank you, Commissioner Kozak. Are there any further nominations?
I just wanted to second that nomination if it requires a second, and also second the sentiment as well.
All right, perfect. Seeing no other nominations, I'll close the period for that. Before we proceed to the vote, I'll open up the floor for any other discussion on that nomination. If there is any, seeing none, we'll proceed to the roll call. Commissioner Boone?
Yes.
Clegg?
Aye.
DeMillo?
Aye.
Doherty?
Aye.
Garcia?
Aye.
Hill?
Aye.
Kozak?
Aye.
Nay?
Aye.
Nay, sorry. Perry?
Aye.
Sandberg?
Aye.
Smith?
Aye.
Rubenstein?
Aye.
And I don't believe that Ginder should vote on that. But, Chair Ginder?
I'll do an aye.
All right. With that, Commissioner Ginder has been elected to the chair. Next, we'll proceed with the vice chair position. And I'll open up the nomination now for anyone to make a nomination. Sandberg?
Thank you. I would like to nominate Commissioner Rubenstein, who I think has done a lovely job as vice chair, and if she's willing to continue, I think we would be lucky to have her.
All right, perfect. Are there any other nominations for the position? Seeing none, I'll close the nomination period and open up the floor for any other discussion on the nomination. Seeing none, I'll proceed with the roll call. Commissioner Boone?
Aye.
Clegg?
Aye.
DeMillo?
Aye.
Doherty?
Aye.
Garcia?
Aye.
Hill?
Aye.
Kozak?
Aye.
Nye?
Aye.
Perry? Aye. Sandberg?
Aye.
Smith?
Aye.
Vice Chair Rubenstein?
Aye, and thank you.
And Chair Ginder.
Aye.
All right, with that completed, we'll now proceed to the secretary. I'll open up the nomination period for any nominations. Perry?
Yes, I'd like to nominate Commissioner Joe Garcia for secretary again.
Thank you.
I'll second that. Kozak.
Are there any other nominations for the election? Seeing none, I'll close the nomination period. Is there any other general discussion? Seeing none, we'll proceed with the roll call. Commissioner Boone,
Aye.
Clegg,
Aye.
DeMillo,
Aye.
Doherty,
Aye.
Garcia,
Aye. Thank you.
Hill,
Aye.
Kozak,
Aye.
Nye,
Aye.
Perry, Sandberg, Smith,
Aye.
Vice Chair Rubenstein,
Aye.
and Chair Ginder.
Aye.
All right, with that, we have completed the election for the 2024 year. Congratulations to all our commissioners. With that, Chair Ginder, I'll turn the chair back to you.
Thank you, Mr. Clerk. And thank you, Commissioners. Our next agenda item is the approval of the Charter Commission 2023 Annual Report, and if approved, this report will be forwarded to the Chief Judge of the District Court. I think you've had an opportunity to look at this, and we've discussed it previously. Is there any discussion on the annual report? Okay, so we have a we have a motion to approve and submit the annual report. Is there a second?
Second, Sandberg.
Any other further discussion? Seeing no further discussion, I'm sorry, Commissioner Nye.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just a quick question about the format of this report. Is it, I'm the new guy, so this is my first time seeing something like this. Is this traditionally the type of information that the Chief Judge has asked from us, or are there pieces that we've taken out or added? What typically is the format of this report?
Mr. Carl, if you could respond.
Mr. Chair, Commissioner Nye, yes, the report has followed this format for many years. I've been here since 2010. This is the format that was in place when I came. Typically, the annual report is required to inform the Chief Judge, and I would suggest also therefore the public, of the number of meetings, the current roster, any amendments that were considered, any amendments that were processed by this body and ultimately either adopted or rejected. We provide a little bit more detail in terms of not just the membership, but the officers, the staff that work with the body, and some of the better, highlights of the work over the course of a year. But this has been the standard form for many, many years. Happy to take any suggestions by the body, or even if not in amending this, considering improvements that the body thinks would be helpful to the Chief Judge as we consider creating the 2024 annual report, of course.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Carl. And seeing no other discussion, all those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? That motion passes. The report has been approved, and I'll direct the clerk to forward this to the Chief Judge. Our next item on the agenda is the approval of an amendment to the Charter Commission calendar. Our adopted calendar from the December 15th meeting had our third regular meeting scheduled for October 9th, 2023, which will conflict with another city meeting. 24, excuse me. The amendment before us is to reschedule our meeting to Wednesday, September 25th. Is there any discussion on this item? And could I please have a motion to amend the calendar? And is there a second?
Second, Hill.
And I see no further discussion. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, say nay. That motion passes, and the calendar has been amended. Our next agenda item is discussion regarding the charter officer appointment process. And before we get into that, I know that Mr. Carl's had discussion with several of the impacted entities in the city and has some updates that he would like to share with us before we get into any discussion we have on these items.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Commissioners, After each of your meetings, I do a very brief report back to the mayor and the council on what's happened and any decisions taken by this body. And after the last meeting, of course, I said that there was a proposal to have a joint meeting between the mayor, the council, this body, in terms of considering amendments that had been discussed previously for the city charter. You'll recall that on Halloween of last year, we had a joint meeting in this space where a number of amendments covering all 9 of the existing articles and even proposing a new Article 10 were discussed at least at a high level. And as part of that, one of the issues that this body took out and had referred to a special working group was the question of appointments that are made by and then consented to by the mayor and council together under the current charter, and then proposals to change that to align with the organizational structure that the mayor and council had already adopted. When I had shared that, I have heard from the mayor's office, from several members of the city council, and also from the city attorney's office about the proposal, this specific proposal on appointments may be premature at this point, and they would like to have more time on their end to consider what that's going to be. I think I was directed, my office, to work with the chair of the working group to work on finding dates for joint meetings, and I think before we proceed down that path, it would be wise for us to maybe give some space and time for the council and the mayor to clarify what it is they may want to be doing. And so I had communicated to Chair Ginder that it would probably be the better option for us to delay any further action by the working group and thus by this body for at least a month or so until there was a bit more clarification from the mayor and council in terms of where they wanted to potentially go. I offer that because the working group, for those of you who weren't at the working group meeting, I think ended with the idea that before proceeding too far, there was a goal of bringing in input from the existing mayor and council on what that appointment process was and any thoughts they might have on leaving it the same, making changes. So as I said to Chair Ginder, I would suggest that this body maybe delay further work at this point on that particular issue until the mayor and council have had a chance to consider. You know that the council is being seated formally on Monday next week, and at that point, they'll elect officers and establish committees. And so I would respectfully request that we postpone at least for a month any further work on this, and then could come back once the new council is seated with dates and times for a joint meeting, if that was the direction to go.
And Mr. Carl, if I understand correctly, that would also mean, I know there had been some talk about setting up a public hearing on this particular issue, delaying that public hearing until we have a little further information on what the impacted entities' views on the appointment process might look like in the future.
Correct, Mr. Chair.
Okay.
Mr. Chairman?
Commissioner Kozlak.
All right.
Commissioner Doherty, we'll let you go first.
Thank you. Mr. Chair, I'm just wondering, does that hold true also for the changes in Article 10?
Through the chair, Commissioner Doherty, no. The proposed changes in a new Article 10, which would relate to boards and commissions established in the city charter, was not a part of the concern.
Commissioner Kozlak.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Carl, I'll ask you, I don't know if you can answer or have the answer, but given the fact that this might be, the appointment issue might be somewhat controversial at some point, and I think it makes sense to delay until the council and the mayor have had a chance to discuss. Is there any chance that they're going to come in with a proposal of their own, get together, and so that we have a consensus? Is that possible, do you think? Or are they trying to work on that, put it that way?
Mr. Chair, I would say to Commissioner Kozak and all commissioners, all things are possible. Who knows?
Thank you.
Are there other questions for Mr. Carl? Thank you, Mr. Carl. Is there further discussion on item 10? in light of Mr. Carl's comments, anything that anybody would like to raise at this time? We're still on number 8. Commissioner Clegg.
I agree that we should wait and give the mayor and the council time to discuss. I just want to keep us on a timeline because we have a little longer than May 1st, but not too much. And it's going to take time, especially if we have to hold public hearings, which we are required to do under our rules. So let's keep a tight leash on it.
Commissioner Doherty.
I do have one more question. Is, when we left our working group meeting, we talked about having a joint meeting with either the full Charter Commission or the working group and the city council. Is that still on the table or on the board?
Mr. Chair, Commissioner Doherty, no. The reason I asked the chair for the delay was because the council hasn't even organized. And so it was premature for me to begin setting up dates for any kind of a joint meeting until the new council has organized, which is Monday. The mayor and the council have had a chance to talk through what their position might be on this. I would recommend, if the body would so consider, there is not a regular meeting in February. But I appreciate Commissioner Clegg noting the deadline and timelines for submitting ballots. And perhaps the body would authorize the chair and the clerks to work on both communicating with the mayor and council and then back to the work group / charter commission. If a meeting is necessary, we would schedule that in February and give everyone plenty of notice in advance. I would assume, I mean, I know what the council's calendar is for January. It's very, very, very busy. And so I don't imagine we would be able to get a joint meeting in the month of January, but certainly I think in February would be very possible. And so I would suggest or recommend or request respectfully that this body authorize its chair to work with my staff on whatever that is, if it's the full body of the Charter Commission in a joint meeting as we did on Halloween, or if it's the smaller working group. I don't have a preference in terms of how that goes, a recommendation, but that we would work to delay that until February.
Thank you, Mr. Carl. Commissioner?
My question is around logistics. It's always about logistics. So you mentioned if a meeting is needed. How does that get determined? Who determines that? And who determines whether it is a full body, the full body that meets, or a small work group?
Mr. Chair, I would assume, these are all assumptions, and I would be willing to be instructed formally by this body. Once the new council is seated and has had a chance to discuss, and if the mayor and the council reach agreement, would be happy to communicate back what their position on this is. The new council and the mayor have not taken a formal position on this. So if they were to take a position, we'd communicate that back. And at that point, this body would have to make a decision on, are we going to go forward on our own initiative? Are we going to concur with what the mayor and council feel their position is at that time? And so this body would have to make a decision. I would communicate the mayor and council's position to the chair would communicate that with the working group at least, and then a series of decisions would be made about whether we're proceeding with a joint meeting and when, or not, and what that reasoning would be.
I would, if I can just interject at one point here. If you will recall, when we tried to set up the first joint meeting with the city council, that took a lengthy period of time, 6 months. So I don't know how long it will take. I don't know what the council will think about the idea of having a joint meeting again. I don't know if the council might decide to have a smaller group want to do it, whether it's a committee or just its own work group. And so I think it's kind of incumbent upon us to see where they might go on that, and then we can respond to that. I'm also cognizant of the concerns raised by you and Commissioner Clegg about our own timeline, that regardless of what the council ends up doing on this, we have our own timeline to move forward on. And so I myself am agreeable to this, basically a 1-month delay to see if we get some feedback, even with the possibility of some kind of possible agreement or movement on where the parties are and what they would like to see on that, but still have sufficient time for us to move forward and hold our requisite public hearing is on this issue. And so that's kind of my take on this. But do we have other comments yet, questions? Commissioner DeMello.
Thank you, Chair Ginder. My suggestion, depending on whether a joint meeting happens between the three bodies, the City Council, Mayor's Office, the Charter Commission, I would like to have a working group before said meeting that happens to make sure that we are on the same page as a commission.
No, I think that's a good idea, and that we would try and do that before any joint meeting.
One last question.
One last question, Commissioner Doherty.
Hope springs eternal. If the mayor and the city council and this commission still agree, actually by ordinance, to have an amendment or an ordinance, would that still require public hearings?
Yes, is I guess the short answer, we would still, under our rules, have a hearing on any amendment that would come by ordinance or from the body itself. Any other discussion? I don't know if we need a motion on this or just as an understanding of the will of the body that Mr. Carl will return with some, and I will work with Mr. Carl to see if there's any movement to be made on a joint meeting and or public hearing. Commissioner, again.
I feel as though it's still very loose. I think we need some timeline. So should we expect to hear from you in 2 weeks?
Mr. Chair, I would say that you should expect to hear from me by February 1st. State law requires us to have at least 3 days' notice to call a special meeting. And so based on any communication that I would have with the chair, I would expect that we would have some formal communication out to all of you within the first week of February, giving you a sense of what potential next steps are. And I agree, Commissioner DeMello, that and I think I saw the chair of that work group, at least one of the co-chairs, Commissioner Clegg, shaking his head yes, that having the work group reconvene to respond and decide what would go forward at that point to the full body makes sense. And so we would work with the correct officers to schedule a work group meeting and then a meeting of the full commission to decide what, if any, actions are appropriate at that time, recognizing the long-term schedule set by state law, which none of us can change or control, to submit a ballot question to the voters this year.
Thank you.
Any other discussion on that matter? I don't believe there's any action to take on that matter. And seeing that that does complete our agenda, and so in the absence of, I guess we have an opportunity for public comment. Has anybody filed for public comment, Mr. Clerk?
Chair Ginder, we have no members of the public signed up for public comment, and we haven't had any written comments submitted, so, no.
And is there anyone here for public comment that would like to address the commission? Seeing no one, I believe we can now conclude our business. We have concluded our business, and without objection, we would stand adjourned. Thank you.